What's up? What's up? Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. Happy time zone. I hope everyone is well. It's been a while. It's been 2 days since we did the last stream. So I hope everyone is feeling okay. And still driving solo because Shannon is enjoying her maternity leave, which is absolutely great. Code with Sean is already saying something. What is wrong, Sean? Yeah. Where is that correct for Imagine Cap? What do you mean? What Imagine Cap? Happy time zone, Bolt. Did I do something wrong? What Imagine Cap? This is definitely not the Imagine Cap, Sean. You're getting me confused. I haven't even started yet, and I'm still having coffee. So please don't do that to me. It's gonna be a long day because right after this one, I'm jumping straight into a session for Microsoft Spark, which is our internal conference, and I have to deliver like a million sessions. I missed most of the UK tech community day because of an issue, but I'm here for the best stream. Rock on, buddy. It is the best stream. It's all about Microsoft Identity Protection, right? Microsoft Information Protection today. And I brought my very good friend Tom, who's working with the engineering team, right? You're a PM for the SDK, is that right, Tom?
Yeah, I work on the Microsoft Information Protection team on the MIP SDK, some of our graph stuff, and with a whole bunch of customers and partners building MIP integrations.
Nice. So I heard about MIP, or I started working with MIP back in 2018 when I was a PFE, still a young PFE, back in the good old days. And I remember customers were really looking into that because it's an exciting feature, but I never really had the chance to get my hands dirty with it and play around. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what the service is and then show us stuff? Because it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, we shipped the MIP SDK back in September 2018 is when we GA'd. And it really, if you've seen Azure Information Protection or the native Microsoft Information Protection story, and I'll show you some screenshots here in a few minutes, it allows me to classify, label, and protect information across M365 and across third-party partners. So by allowing our users or our applications and services to apply a sensitivity label to something, we can drive the protection story, whether that's encrypting a document to restrict access to it, which has been our RMS feature for quite a long time, or restricting, like in Teams, I can say this is a highly confidential team, and so no guests should have access to it. And
wait a minute. So all the emails I get from MSIT, it's you guys saying you are lacking the appropriate permissions on your Teams team?
It's probably not us, but it's probably DSR that's driving that through one of our features. For
right.
Sure.
Okay. Cool. I love it. Or not so much because it just annoys me. Like I need to have people collaborating, and they're like, no, you need to apply the appropriate labels here.
Gotta secure it. It's gotta be.
You gotta secure it. Okay.
So yeah, so we shipped the Azure Information Protection client several years ago now. That lit this up in Office, and then in the last couple of years, we've shipped support for native labeling, and that's going to remove the need for the AIP client inside of Office. So now I can just apply labels really across M365, Teams, and Outlook, OA, Office apps, Power BI.
Yeah.
And then we have some external partners that have integrated along the way in the DLP space, Adobe, a whole bunch of other ones. You can actually find the full list of those at aka.ms/MISA, M-I-S-A. We have a catalog there that shows all of our integrated partners.
MISA. I'll add that to MISA. Our captions so we can say it. So the thing that I have in my Word document, which says, label accordingly, or the one in Outlook where we can change the sensitivity of the email, is that driven by MIP as well?
Yep. So under the covers in both Office and the AIP client, that's all driven by the MIP SDK, which is what we'll talk about today.
Nice. Now, is it just documents or Office 365, or can I protect other things in my network, like shared drives and stuff like that? Am I jumping the gun? Am I still
no. Primarily, we support documents is sort of the default. Our SDK has a component called the File SDK, which lets me reason over files. Two of the other components, our policy SDK and protection SDK, would really let you protect anything you want. You could protect, actually a great example of this is Microsoft Edge. If you're using Edge to store your browser data, to roam your browser data, like your
Yes.
bookmarks and your passwords and all that stuff, Edge is actually using MIP under the covers to protect that information. So they generate an encryption key. It encrypts all your stuff. They use our SDK to encrypt that encryption key, and then they store it up in the cloud.
I love it. Is that
Now-
for private or both enterprise and private accounts that sign into Edge?
Just for enterprise.
For enterprise, okay.
So MSAs use a different process, similar, but it's not using
Okay.
our SDK. So this allows the enterprise to control access to that information. The enterprise admins could decrypt it if they need to, that kind of thing.
Nice, very nice. Okay. And there's an SDK that anybody can integrate into their line of business apps, right?
Yep. So I'll do a demo app today, or show a demo app today of an integration that might look like what customers or partners could do with a line of business app, and then I'll talk about an integration that one of our customers, Komatsu Mining, actually did with our SDK a couple of years ago.
Very nice. And we were talking about this before we kicked off the show, but this is not only for, like I said, is it governed by Azure AD? And you said yes and no. Partly from Azure AD, but it's not just Azure AD, which is great because it allows external partnerships as well, like external accounts to the org to come in and participate in the system, right? In the integration.
We do depend on Azure AD for identity, so we like to say that we're an identity-based protection. So I have to be an authorized identity to consume the protected content.
Yep.
So that means we rely on AAD for authentication. Even in the guest scenario or external scenario for most of our use cases, there's one exception for secure email, but I have to have an Azure AD account or a Microsoft account. We use that for authentication, and then our service handles the authorization component. We make sure that the user who's authenticating is actually specified as being permitted to open that document, and then we'll grant access. And we can do that through either evaluation of domains. We can just look at your email domain and say, everybody at contoso.com is allowed to access this. We can look at group memberships or just the individual user.
Okay, cool. So you have a deck and then you have a demo, which is great. Just share your screen now so everybody can see it.
Cool. So I'll run through this.
Is that going to be publicly available? So can we share it afterwards if people want to download it?
I'll follow up with a link. I don't have a link public for this yet, but
don't worry about it. We will add it at the links below on the YouTube video. So if you're watching us on YouTube and you haven't had a chance to watch it live, the links should be there. If they're not, ping me. I might forget, I'm getting old and I forget things. So if I promise and don't deliver, then you know where to find me.
Yeah, so I'll give a quick overview of the SDK, and then we'll get into the sample code because I think that's what people really want to see. So MIP is really not something we sell. It's a comprehensive set of capabilities, as you can read here on the slide. It encompasses a whole bunch of our different services. So you'll find integrations across Defender for Cloud Apps, DLP, Windows Information Protection, Sentinel, Purview. And it really leverages that labeling interface to start to drive protection controls and actions for my data, no matter where the data lives. You can also see Adobe on here. We have some integration with Adobe for protected PDFs, which was a big customer feature. And so this labeling is really becoming ubiquitous across M365 and even into some Azure services now. And it's going to help our customers, continue to help our customers to label and protect their data and to ensure that they're putting the best protections around their most confidential information.
Yes. Do I need to run everything on Azure for me to benefit from this? From this, like there might be customers that they have a lot of stuff on-prem. Do they benefit from it, or do they have to be on Azure for this thing to work?
As far as the SDK is concerned, we require an Azure Active Directory identity and a subscription for our service. So the only real Azure components that are required are AAD in our service. They could run this on-prem if they want to, if they meet those requirements. So they could build an application that runs on an IIS machine on-prem, and that would run just fine.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Or is that not recommended? Like, please don't do it.
I think it's fine. I think the more important thing is to protect your data where your data lives. And so
Yes,
if you've
exactly.
got stuff on-prem still that needs to be protected, then I don't see any reason why they shouldn't run this on-prem. And we do also support our legacy service, which is Active Directory Rights Management Service, which is actually our on-prem Windows
Okay.
Server component, and people can use the SDK to protect against that as well.
Very nice. What about things on Azure Storage? Like if I dump a lot of files in Azure Storage, is there a way for me to protect access via MIP, or is that all managed by RBAC, for example? So totally different to what MIP can offer.
MIP can do it. The catch is that really the SDK can protect any files as long as you can
Right.
get us the stream of bytes. Like we don't care
Okay.
where it lives because you're gonna read that from disk or from your blob storage or wherever it
Yep.
lives, apply the protection to it, and then write it back. So as long as you can do that, we don't really care where it's stored.
Very nice. So
But
it's on the fly.
yeah, the catch for something like blob storage is if you have an application that depends on it and you go encrypt a bunch of your data now,
Yeah.
your apps might break.
Or they might be slow because they have to decrypt on the fly. I guess
Yeah, that
if
can
they
be too. They
integrate
have
with
to
the
make a call
SDK.
to our service, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. We'll talk about latency later on when you show code. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun because I have all these questions that
No worries.
come. Okay, cool.
So the labeling itself we configure in Compliance Center. So this is just a quick snapshot that maybe I can zoom in a little on that shows the admin interface. We don't have much time to drill through this, but I can create a labeling taxonomy. This is pretty close to what the Microsoft taxonomy looks like internally, where we start with non-business and we go down to highly confidential.
Yep.
And then beneath some of our labels, we have sublabels that allow me to scope the information or scope the protection controls based on the audience. And so you'll see here that I've got this confidential FTEs, approved partners and vendors, and that would be that any FTEs, approved partners and vendors can access this data, whereas the one below it is only for my full-time employees.
Yeah.
And generally, we recommend when you're configuring the sensitivity labels that you keep it simple. It pains me when I see customers that are creating hundreds of labels. It's hard to manage, and it gets pretty confusing for end users. So the fewer labels, the better.
Yes. You heard that, friends. Do not create a ton of labels.
Yeah. Nobody wants to see a drop down that they have to scroll through. All right. So as far as supported platforms and languages,
Yes.
we really started over with MIP SDK a few years ago. So we had some legacy SDKs, RMS SDK 2.1 and 4.2, that worked across various platforms. And it was kind of an inconsistent experience. If you did something on Windows, it was different than what you did on Mac or iOS. And developers struggled with it. Understandably, it was confusing.
Yeah.
So we looked at what we had and said, well, let's do something that's completely cross-platform and is the same across every platform. So we started with building an SDK that was all cross-platform native C++. So we can run natively across Mac, Linux. We support Ubuntu, Debian, and Red Hat / CentOS, all supported Windows versions, and then Android and iOS.
And this doesn't require the devices to be in tune, right? Do they need to be onboarded in the corporate network as Intune, or is it totally independent?
Totally independent.
Love it.
Really, that dependency will be on like conditional access. So if my conditional access policies require that I am managed by Intune, then I have to be managed. But our SDK runs independently.
Cool. Love it.
Yeah.
And we have C++ and .NET. C++, that's an interesting choice. I suspect that because it's a first-party language that a lot of services have been written with. Was that the decision to drive it?
C++ was the choice because it's completely cross-platform. And we have to do minimal work to make it work across any platform. So the sample that I'll show everybody today is .NET, but could reasonably work on Ubuntu in .NET Core with minimal changes. But if I was using one of our C++ samples today, I could just take that, go compile it in Linux or Mac with just probably some compiler flag changes, and it would run just fine.
People are excited about the C++ side. I love it. I didn't know we had so many C++ fans. Great, thanks, Phil
We
Snubble.
don't. So that was actually a pain point at the beginning, was that a lot of our
Okay.
customers wanted to take this, and many of our customers don't have C++ developers.
Yes.
This was primarily to help out some of our big DLP partners, really to ensure that we had that cross-platform consistency that then we could build on. And so by using things like Swig now, we've generated the .NET wrapper, we've generated the Java wrapper. And so our .NET version of the SDK is really just a wrapper on top of the native libraries. And then the same is true for Java. And so we've got support for .NET and Windows and Ubuntu today. And then we've got Java support in preview.
Nice. And so the graph service is just an API, which means that anything that can wrap around the REST API and authenticate, then they can call the service. Is that it?
The Graph Endpoint is a subset of our SDK. So I'll talk about the 3 SDK components here in
Okay.
a second. And the Graph functionality is exposing the functionality from the Graph Endpoint is exposing functionality from one of those SDKs.
Okay. Is there anything with JavaScript coming? Like I know there's a lot of, like these days, people are pretty sold on JavaScript and TypeScript. Are you guys working on anything like that, or am I giving too things like NDA stuff? Don't talk about it.
No, we don't have any plans today for JavaScript or TypeScript.
Okay.
A lot of what we do as far as files are concerned is pretty heavyweight. Requires a lot of parsing, requires
All right.
depth
Okay.
knowledge of the file formats, and so we're exploring other ways that we can expose the protection functionality via JavaScript, but we don't have any plans to build an SDK today.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I mean, it makes sense why C++ was a great choice in terms of performance and working with low-level file system stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see a question there. So we do support .NET Core today. The sample app I'm going to show today is actually an ASP.NET Core application.
Oh, that's me. I'm messing with the chat because people are like, C++ is great and it's good
Oh, is
for...
you? Oh.
Yeah, it's fine.
And then no support for Node today.
Not support for... I mean, JavaScript, Node, it will be the same. So I get it. Cool. I mean, if people want to see it, and then we have a flood of requests coming in, then that's probably something that the product team might want to take as feedback, right? So let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
We're open to feedback.
So if we look at the SDK itself, MIP SDK is a sort of overloaded term. It's really 3 SDKs. Each of these have a different purpose or set of functionalities. So starting on the right side, lower right, we have the protection SDK, and that's what handles what we would refer to as maybe the RMS functionality or all the encryption, decryption functionality. So that's going to take in buffers or streams of bytes, and it's going to give me back an encrypted or decrypted buffer or stream of bytes. It handles all the rights management. It handles all the communication with our service. And so it really simplifies, give me some text as input or give me some bytes as input. Tell me how to protect this, and then I'll take care of the rest.
So before you move on, I assume that at any point to start using the MIP SDK, you need to have an authenticated user with an ID token so you know who that user is, right? Yes. Yep. Is there any dependency on the MSAL library? Like, do we care how people authenticate, or can I use any open source library to grab an ID token from Azure AD, and then as long as I have something in the cache, then the file SDK can use it?
I'd like to tell our customers and partners, don't care how you get a token. So we have an auth delegate. I'll show you an example of that here in a few minutes. And all we ask for is that you give us back an OAuth token. Doesn't matter how you got it. You can hard code it. You could use PowerShell, whatever you want.
Okay, nice.
And our C++ sample apps actually on GitHub don't use MSAL because we don't have a version of MSAL for C++
yet.
So we've had and so we've had to
come up with
shell
your
out
own
to
wrapper.
Python for MSAL, or MSAL for Python. We use that to get the token and then come back. So
interesting approach. I like it.
Yeah,
okay.
Works. Not pretty, but it works.
You don't have to tell people. It just works, right? Don't care about what's beneath.
You got a token. That's all that matters.
You got a token somehow. We don't care about it. Good. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
So the protection SDK will be used by apps like Office, Adobe. applications that have a knowledge of the file format, they're parsing the file apart itself, they're reading the streams out of it, and they can encrypt and decrypt them. So also used by Edge, that case I mentioned earlier where they protect our roaming data. They're going to use the protection SDK to protect those AES keys. The next one's the policy SDK. And now this is the functionality that's also exposed in Graph. So this is where I can call into Graph or call into our policy SDK. I can list labels and get back data on the policy. And I'll actually talk more in detail here. Well,
And can
maybe we'll see
you-
that. We'll go to the demos here shortly.
Yeah, sure. Is any of these programmatically set up? Like, does the service support ARM? Does the service support deployment tools for CI/CD, or is still things require manual intervention and portal work?
It requires portal. Well, it requires portal work.
Okay.
So most of this all this configuration actually lives on, the M365 side. So I have to go
Right.
into Compliance Center. I have to log in to go to the information protection blade and then start to configure stuff there.
Okay.
There is PowerShell extensibilities. So if I have learned that, I could probably automate some of it with PowerShell. But outside of that, we don't. Like, I can't go into Graph and start to publish labels today.
Okay, because I suspect that this is not something that you spin up all the time. It's not like a web app that you have to deploy and redeploy as part of your continuous integration, right? So it's one thing that you deploy once, I guess, and then maybe you have a different service tenant for development purposes, right? Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Typically, we'll see that when customers and partners, even Microsoft, like if you look internally at our labeling taxonomy, it doesn't change that frequently. So once it's deployed and in production, we've educated users. They know what it looks like. We don't want to change it that much because then that involves user re-education. So it's generally relatively static. And then most of our customers and partners will have a dev environment that they test against.
Okay, cool. Thanks for answering that.
So then the policy SDK is what handles, if you see this drop down here in Office, if I click this is all driven by the policy SDK. So that's going to make that call to our service. It's going to fetch my label policy for this user. It defines what happens when I click this button. So as I click this, it's going to say, all right, to label this document as highly confidential, you need to take some actions. And those actions might be things like apply metadata action, remove metadata action, apply header and footer or watermark, or maybe apply protection. So the policy SDK doesn't do anything in my app. It just tells my app what I need to make my app do. And so in this case, Office would get this response back, and then Office would have to take those explicit actions to apply the appropriate controls.
Cool.
And last up is the file SDK, which is the one we'll show today. It combines functionality for both protection and policy, and allows me to very easily apply those controls and those labels to files. So I pass in a file or a path to a file. I can either use a stream or just give it a file and disk and tell it, apply a label, remove protection, do something to it.
Yep.
And what I'll get back is the labeled file. So I don't have to know anything about the internals. I don't have to understand how a PDF is built. I just say, go to this PDF, apply this label, and then we're good.
Nice. All done for me. Love it.
Yeah. So I think maybe we'll jump over to the code.
Absolutely. Give me some code.
Visual Studio. So this is let me grab a link to it. Sample application that we have in GitHub today, which I've lost the link for.
It's fine.
We'll come back to that. So this app's out in GitHub, and I've already set it up, but I thought we'd walk through the app config because or app registration, because this is a stumbling point that we've seen some customers.
It's a 45 show app registration.
Yeah,
Nice.
last
Love it.
night. Wanted to make sure everything worked. So demo gods would be kind.
You know what? This is a safe environment. We can fail safely. People love to see us fail. Right, Bolt?
true.
Right, team? It's fine. I'm just kidding.
It's funny.
Right, let's go.
So I've added this app registration, and this would be, doesn't have to be the first thing you do, but probably one of towards the top of the list. Pretty straightforward as far as configuration. We've configured a web app with
Yep.
some redirect URIs.
Mhm.
So we've got the redirect and then the front channel logout. We have an app secret, which I've pre-configured so that I don't have to put my secret out on the stream. And then what we need to set up here are the API permissions. And this is a common place where we see people stumble. So we'll do this really quick. It takes about a minute. So to get this functioning with our sample application, I need to add permissions for 2 different APIs. So our SDK depends on the Azure Rights Management Service, and it depends on something called the Microsoft Information Protection Sync Service.
Cool.
Adding and finding the Rights Management Service is super easy. It's right here. So we can click that, and this specific application needs...
Look at you guys, you got prime spot at the very top.
Oh, it's so easy.
How did you pull this off?
It's been there for a long time. The other one's a little more buried. So this app's going to generate content, protected content for users. And so what we need to make sure is that our service principal has what's called content.writer, which is going to allow my service principal to publish content as itself. So it'll be the owner of the content, and it can publish it with whatever label or for whatever users it needs to publish it for.
And the writer, I assumes reader permission as well. Lots of assumptions here.
It'll have reader for any content that it owns. So we have this concept in MIP about being like the protection owner.
Okay.
And the protection owner gives me special rights. So if I'm authoring a document and I protect it and I send it to somebody, they may or may not be able to decrypt it based on the rights they have, but I will always be able to decrypt it because it's my doc and I'm the owner. So if this service creates a document, it can decrypt its own. But if I take a Word doc from my desktop and I upload it, it won't be able to decrypt it unless I give it the right here, this content.superuser.
I see. Wow,
So
that's
this
an
would
elevated
ensure-
permission. Damn.
Yeah. So this would ensure that any content that gets uploaded to the site is able to be decrypted, no matter who wrote it or who owns
Wow.
it.
That's probably a fairly elevated privilege for a service principal, right?
Yeah, you'll see it pretty commonly across Office services. So Exchange, Cloud App Security, a lot of first-party services have that right because they need it to be able to function. We've seen it in for like DLP policies and things. We see this pretty commonly for e-discovery. So customers that run e-discovery in their environment across email have to be able to decrypt everything, and so they'll need this right to decrypt PST files and things. But yeah, it's people ask a lot of questions when you start to tell them they need to add super user.
Yeah, I agree. Also, Sankifi, when in doubt, give it all permissions, right? No.
Right.
No, it's the exact opposite. When in doubt, give it as little permissions as possible. We go with least privilege, not the most privilege. But I know you're messing with us because you've been with us for a while, so I like it. Keep at it.
So we'll add those, and then the other one's a little buried, harder to find. But we go to this APIs my organization uses, and if I can type, we find this Microsoft Information Protection Sync Service. And we look at app permissions, and there's just one, so this one's easy. And this one, I'll give it all of them. So this one allows my application to read my tenant policies. So it's going to, when my service calls our policy endpoint is going to return all of the published labels for the tenant. This one's a little less risky. We always return the list of labels for a tenant, no matter whether I'm in scope or out of scope for those labels, and that helps us to be able to resolve them in the user interface. So not as much of a concern here with exposing this one to service principals, not as much as super user. So we'll have that, and then grant consent.
Very nice. So you have to add admin consent because it's a service principal and it will be service to service?
Yeah, it's a service principal. Yep.
Yeah. So there's no user consent here or admin consent. You have to add it before you even start using the service principal in your app.
Right.
Cool. Good to know because we stumbled across this one quite a few times. Right.
Okay. Yeah, people love it when there's that last minute surprise that they have to talk to an admin. So I think maybe what I'll do now is we'll run this and make sure it works with with the settings we changed. So what I did pre-stage this was for that application. I copied my tenant ID, my client ID into the config, and then the client ID here because I need to dedupe that, so I don't need those in both places. But for now, client ID in both places.
And no client secret.
The client secret is up here in my secrets.json.
Oh.
That way I don't accidentally send it to GitHub again.
I'm actually doing a session about that right after we roll the show. So the Spark session is all about hiding these secrets and making sure that they don't end up in GitHub.
Secret. This is great. This has helped me. I haven't.
We should do it via GitHub. We should do it via Key Vault. So that's every sprint supposed to have access to Key Vault, and then that secret should be in Key Vault. But
I should be using certificates instead of a
or certificates. Yeah, but it's for the demo, and we totally understand. We do it all the time.
Pretend I'm doing it all right.
Don't do as we do. Just do as we tell you. Right? Use a certificate or Key Vault.
So the secrets in secrets.json,
Cool.
App settings, I just configure these three things, which I can get out of my app registration here. Not there. And if you clone this application, and all goes well, configure the app registration, configure the API permissions. It's all in the README. Configure the redirect URI, and then just set that stuff in here, and it should just build and run, which is what we're going to try now.
Sweet. Holding my breath. Everyone's holding their breath. Like, will it run? We actually have an emote for that. I don't know if it's in the free emotes. Will it run?
Doing something.
It's doing something for sure. Somebody's putting finger crossed. It will work, you know?
There we go. All right, so this is ASP.NET Core sample app that looks familiar, probably just like one of the Razor samples. And it's meant to simulate what a customer might have with a line of business application. Grossly oversimplified. But we've got a concept in here of a security policy and then a data export and a data import. So this might be, we could pretend this is an HR application.
Very nice.
So the first thing we'll look at is security policy. And very basic, what this app lets me do is either set a label on download for a file. So when somebody extracts information from the application, we'll apply a label to it. And that's what this download policy is here. So anytime somebody downloads something from this app, we're automatically going to apply this highly confidential FTE approved partners and vendors.
Yep.
If I click this drop down here, you can see this is the policy SDK in action. We're getting a list back of all of the labels that exist in my tenant. And in this case, I've just selected this one.
So that's your graph call, right? Am I correct?
In this case, that's going through MIP SDK, but I could also implement that through Graph.
See, I'm listening. Good.
And we actually did a session yesterday. Maybe I'll send you the link after for the M365 community call that we talked about the Graph endpoint.
Perfect. Yeah.
The other option here we have is upload policy. So this is could be used to restrict certain types of information from being written to a container. So in this case, we've said the upload policy requires nothing more sensitive than general. If I try to upload a file that's highly confidential to this container, it's going to tell me I can't do that because this site's not cleared for highly confidential information. And this is a way that you could protect blobs or protect even your own line of business apps and services so that people don't put sensitive information in places where it doesn't belong.
Ooh, I love this. I love this because a lot of people will put stuff in public containers. We've seen many leaks from insecure S3 buckets and blob storages that were open with sensitive information like customer records or employee records and stuff like that. This is a great way to stop you from doing it. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
So the next tab that we'll look at is the this employee data tab. So I've filled in a bunch of fake employees here. Hopefully that's not anybody's real names. And we give you this really big label that says, hey, anything downloaded from here is going to have this label applied to it.
Okay.
So I'm the HR admin or some user, and I come in here and I want to, I'm going to quit the company and I want to export this payroll database. And so I click export. And what's great about this is in the background, this is using MIP SDK. I'm generating an Excel sheet based on this table, and I'm going to let the user download it. The user doesn't know anything happened. It took a second, but they open this up. And let's say they didn't even open it. Maybe they just sent it off to their Gmail to try to steal this data.
Yeah.
When they got home, they'd find that they wouldn't be able to open it because it requires a work identity to get access to. So you'll see a few things here as I open this. Let me zoom in. That's not helping. All right. So down here at the bottom, very tiny, you can see that highly confidential FTE approved partners and vendors was applied to this. So the label, and if I click over here, you'll see it's checked. The label was applied on download, transparent to the end user.
Right.
And if I look in the Backstage view, we'll see that the protection was applied. So this workbook's protected. It's encrypted with Microsoft Information Protection. So this will restrict access to only approved users or domains. And that happened all completely transparent to the end user.
How much?
So if somebody were to,
how much code does it take to write some of that? It's like hundreds of lines of code, 3 lines of code.
it's pretty straightforward. I'll show this last part, and then we'll jump into the code and take a look at exactly how this works. So the last thing here is the user now wants to do the data import. So we'll just take the file that we downloaded because it's highly confidential and try to upload it. And the same thing happens here. This is transparent. User uploads the file. Maybe doesn't know it's labeled. Hopefully they do. Apparently I don't. Oh, so the user in this case doesn't have rights to the file that I've uploaded. So what we do is we can, to prevent a certain leakage scenario where maybe I can upload data to a service and that service will show me the data in plain text. And it'll do it for me if I don't have access. We perform an access check to say, does this user have rights to the content they're trying to upload to my service? If they don't, then we deny access. And so in this case, our security policy label didn't fire at all. If I created a different protection and tried to upload this, we would get an error that says, sorry, this doesn't allow anything beyond general content.
Very nice. So not only does the user need to have rights, but also the document needs to have the right policies based on what you define or the right confidential level. And it applies the policy on the fly. That's great. Somebody's saying, wow, that's crazy. I would have never guessed how that worked, which is great. I'm surprised how easy it was to actually apply it.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So let's talk about the MIP stuff. Get into some code. So the SDK itself has several classes that we need to build on to get things bootstrapped and going. The first and probably most important thing, and where we find that people struggle at the beginning, especially if they don't have a strong identity background, is our auth delegate.
Yes.
I mentioned before, we don't care how you get a token, just get a token and give it to us. And that's implemented through this IAuth delegate interface. And so we'll create a class called auth delegate impl based on this IAuth delegate. And all we have to do is implement this acquire token function.
Okay. So if I already have a token from MSAL, I can just pass the token in here and override these to say that's your token, right?
If it's for our service resource,
yes,
then yes. So like if you've got something that has our scopes in it already, then that would work just fine.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. So our acquired token passes in the identity, and in this case, it's a Microsoft Information Protection identity, not an MSAL identity or anything. It's a little different, which is just our representation of what a user looks like.
Okay.
The authority, the resource, and then optionally claims. This isn't supported today, but we put it there for future growth.
Nice.
This acquire token function gets called anytime I do something that requires authentication. So if I'm going to list my labels, if I'm trying to protect something, those services are going to give a 401 challenge, and that's when we'll end up landing here.
And there's a cache to make sure that we don't hit the endpoints all the time, or does it do it on the fly?
There can be a cache. It's up to if I'm using MSAL and I've used MSAL caching, then I'll get caching. If I'm maybe making direct REST calls on my own and I haven't bothered with caching, then I won't do any caching.
Okay.
Our SDK will
Cache?
do some caching, but
Okay.
we leave most of the auth cache work up to the auth delegate implementation.
Cool.
And outside of that, you can see this is a pretty straightforward call to MSAL. We're just going to make a call, acquire a token, and then get the access token back. And so we return the access token back to the SDK from this auth delegate.
Okay.
We've also got this concept of a consent delegate. This is used primarily for connecting to on-premises ADRMS servers. So you won't see this fire if you're connecting to the cloud, but we'll talk really quick about it.
Okay.
This is more of a security mechanism to ensure that if I'm opening a document that's protected by somebody's on-premises ADRMS environment, that I don't connect to it without consenting to it, because that's going to log data in their service. They're going to see my email address. And we want to make sure that the user who's accessing that information knows that's going to happen. So app developers are responsible for implementing a consent flow that provides that. In my case, I just default to everything. We'll just say everybody consents. But we'll never hit this going to our service. And now we'll look at some of the SDK goo and how to get started actually protecting some content. So getting the SDK bootstraps requires a few things. We have to create an instance of our, well, we'll start with app info. So we create this application info object, and that's going to store my app ID, app name, and app version. And then we pass those into the SDK, this application info object. This is going to surface in our AIP analytics or our M365 auditing portal. This is what we're going to see as far as which app and which version we're touching that data. So we can get all the auditing there, and we'll know which app is acting on that information.
Okay.
We'll instantiate the auth delegate. We should only create one auth delegate per process. We don't need multiples. Just keep one, keep it alive, and reuse it over and over again. It's relatively straightforward. There's not much you have to do with the auth delegate. The SDK handles it on its own. Next, we call this initialize function, and we're going to tell the SDK that I'm going to be a file SDK or file application. So we'll call mip initialize and say mip component.file. And then we have to create what we call a mip config object. And this is going to store some information like the app info object I created above. So again, that app ID, app version, app name. We create a directory for our storage cache. So we will locally store logs and a SQLite database on disk. And we'll store that in whatever directory is configured here. Set our logging level, and then we set whether the app is running offline or not. So next, we're going to pass that in to create this MIP context. MIP context is what sets up the application to start running. So we create a single MIP context per process.
So there'll be a singleton for the whole web app?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the same is true for the file profile. All of this stuff here that we're talking about, this file profile and then later engine and handler, these patterns carry into the other SDKs as well. So if you're setting up a policy app or a protection app, you're going to create a protection profile or a policy profile, a protection engine or a policy engine, just like you'd create a file engine or a file profile here.
Yep.
So then we finish getting this set up, and this file profile is what will get everything bootstrapped as far as moving into the next phase, which is starting user operations. And so we pass this MIP context. We have this file profile settings. We tell it what our cache storage type will be. So in this case, I'm saying in memory. We support an on-disk cache as well as an on-disk encrypted cache. The on-disk cache is useful for apps where you want to avoid service calls. Apps like Office, where we want to make sure the user can get on a plane or a train and still get access to their information without making a call to the service. And then we just pass in a new consent delegate implementation. We load that, and now we're set up. So now we would wait until some user comes along, and we would create what's called an engine for that user. So in this case here, I'm going to check my cache to see if I have an engine that exists already for this user. And if I do, then I'm just going to reference that. If I don't, I'll create a new one. So the first thing to creating a file engine or any of our engines in the SDK is to define the settings for that engine. This is going to control things like the engine ID, which is used for caching. We want to make sure that we use a unique ID here, like a user email address, to store that cache, that engine in the MIP cache, which is going to reduce service calls. We've seen a common mistake that customers and partners make where they just set something, they don't set something here at all, which means we generate a random ID, which means every time I call it, I'm making a call to the service again. So I get no caching benefit. For apps that are dealing with many users or the same user doing many docs, that's a pretty big performance hit.
Yeah.
We'll pass in our auth delegate, and then this is just some custom string we can pass in, and then we pass the locale. So this supports localization. We default to EN US, but you can pass in whatever's configured in your portal, and we'll return the localized strings. So the file engine settings takes in a whole bunch of other things. We'll just show maybe really quick what this looks like. If autocomplete will work.
Come on, IntelliSense, wake up.
Yeah.
Needs more coffee, I guess.
I need more coffee.
No, not you. IntelliSense needs more coffee. I mean, we all need
both
coffee.
of us need more coffee. So while that's loading, things are slow. There we go. Let's see if we can get all these in here. So this will let me set a bunch of different things. I could set like a delegated user, where that'll let me perform operations on behalf of another user. So going back to some of the permissions we had in the portal content, the delegated reader, delegated writer, I can set that and do some stuff as the user. Various other controls. We don't have time to go through each of these, but point is, if I'm trying to control behavior of my file engine, I would do it here. In this case, all we're saying is, hey, connect to the commercial cloud, connect to just commercial Azure instead of GCC or one of our government clouds.
Yep.
Add this engine. We'll do this add engine call. So what we do is we add an engine to the file profile. So everything gets chained up back to that file profile. We'll add an engine. And then now our user can start to do some stuff. So the next time the user goes to, let's say, list labels or protect a file, that's where that auth flow is going to trigger. We're going to see them go off to Azure AD. They're going to get a token and then hopefully go off to our policy endpoint and fetch the label policy.
Nice.
If we, here we go. So once I have the engine now, I can start to do some of those user-specific or file-specific controls. So now this is getting into really the meat of what the SDK provides, which is I've created an engine and now I want to get a label from a file. Well, I'll create what we call a file handler. Again, this pattern applies to policy and protection as well. Policy handler, protection handler. Create this handler that looks at this input stream. Now, going back to our web application, this input stream is that Excel sheet that we uploaded. So I uploaded that file. We're streaming a file up to the service, and we want to create a file handler to that so that I can read the label. So we pass in the input stream. We give it some name. This is what's going to show up in our log analytics. And then we wait for that to come back. So this is all async, probably poorly implemented by me, but so we immediately just wait for it to finish, and we get this handler back. And all we're going to return is handler.label. So at this point, you'll see that, let's just do this.
I think your IntelliSense is dead this morning.
There
you go.
It might be this VM. Might be time for a new machine. We can see that the handler allows me to do a whole bunch of different things. And so this is that file level control that we get over content that we can apply MIP labels to. So I can do classify if I support classification. Commit is what we have to call anytime we make a change. We make a bunch of changes and then commit them. Get temporary copy. I can get the label. So this is really showing, I could read the protection. So if this file's protected, I could say handler.protection, and I could start to get information about that. So I could say, like, do an access check, what's the content ID, who's the owner, and those sorts of things.
Cool. And these are all, so we have samples in GitHub, right? So if people wanted to go and get started today, they can find all this information in GitHub. Is that correct?
Yep. This sample is at, I'll try to post it, aka.ms/MIP SDK Razor sample.
Okay.
And then all of our samples are at aka.ms/MIP SDK samples.
Cool. We'll include the links below. Cool. Next steps for our audience. What should they be doing next?
I'd say take a look at your own line of business apps and services, or if you're working for other customers or partners, take a look at opportunities in their environment to protect data at the source. Go out, look at the samples, and then maybe start with those razor samples, see how it works, and then leave us feedback in GitHub or GitHub issues or
Cool.
Twitch or wherever you like to yell at Microsoft PMs.
Yeah, you know where to find us. So if you're a regular user, you know that we have a Discord. Let me actually put the Discord in the chat.
I joined the Discord yesterday, so
Very nice. So we
yell
have a
at me there as
Discord.
well.
You can find all of us there. You can reach out via email at the 45 show, and you can leave your feedback on GitHub if you actually have any issues with the samples, or if you have difficulty running them and setting them up, then please do reach out. We want people to start trying these. I'm quite surprised that it is that easy to actually protect things, and never really thought about protecting files or things that do end up being shared across my division and outside as well, and how this should be applied. It's all there for me because Outlook and Office does it for me automatically. But when you create line of business apps, this is probably something that we don't really think about a lot until it's too late. So now you know how to approach this. There will be more shows on this one. We have a couple more things scheduled. So stay tuned for upcoming episodes. I think we have a few things lined up in March. But I really appreciate Tom for coming this morning and spending time with us. I learned a lot. I think our audience loved it. We'll publish the YouTube video shortly after this one. And before we go, Tom, any last words?
Thanks everybody for watching, and if you have any questions or issues or feedback on languages that we should support, let me know and we'll take a look.
Yeah, let us know. We always appreciate feedback. So we're gonna raid our very good friend Jeff, and we will see every one of you next week. Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks everybody.
5 seconds to get to your friend Fritz, and then roll in the credits right now.